Today we're going to talk about factoring trinomials. Now there's two parts to this trinomials factoring, and I'll include them both in here. You can fast forward to the one that you need if you need to move to the next one. In order to start factoring trinomials, you have to kind of understand the format of a trinomial. Trinomials are written in the quadratic form. We'll talk about quadratics a little bit later, but in general, the quadratic formula looks something similar to this. ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so you have a squared term, you have an x term, and then you have one with no x called a constant, thus the c. Okay, so you need to know this because we're going to use these letters a, b, and c for various things in our factoring process. Okay, so the first stage that you need to know about is a trinomial where a equals 1. Or you'll see it in the general format of x squared plus bx plus c. So there will be no number in front of the x squared. Okay? Or it'll have a coefficient of 1. So let's look at our first example. Okay? You're given the first example of x squared plus 5x plus 6. Okay? We're going to factor this using a method known as the x factor or the x box. Okay? When we get to trinomials where a does not equal 1, the box will actually come into play more often, where, see how this is just an x? We're going to use just the x in the x box. Okay? So we're going to do the x game. That's what I like to call it. And in the top part of your x game, you're always going to do your a times your c. Okay, so this goes a times c, and in this case we have a 1 here, and whenever you use 1 to multiply, it doesn't really change it, so it's just going to be the c in this case. So we have a positive 6. Okay, and then you can remember this because this is kind of like the attic and the ceiling. Okay, and where are the attic and the ceiling in your house? They're in the top. So that's why the attic times the ceiling go in the top. Okay? And then in the bottom, we just take our b and it comes down here. Okay? And so this is our b, or the basement of our house. Okay? So positive 5 will come down here. Okay? So now, just like we've been practicing with the little diamond problems, you want to figure out what will multiply to give you a positive 6 and add or subtract to give you the 5. And there's a little trick that I learned that you can use to help you. Take the sign of this. This will tell you that you need to add the numbers to get the b, okay, or the bottom. And then this will tell you the sign of the larger number. Okay? So, and if this said negative 6, then you would subtract to get the b. But since it's a plus, we're going to add to get the b. So now, we're looking at the factors of 6. So some of you may want to use this helpful method known as a T-chart to get the factors of 6. So we know that 1 times 6 is 6. And then 2 times 3 is 6. 1, 2, 3. So once you start getting your factors where they're already showing up on the other side, you can stop factoring. You have all the factors of 6. And so now we need to add those numbers to get there. Well, 1 plus 6 equals 7. Well, that's not 5. And 2 plus 3 equals 5. So this is the ones that we want to use. So we want to use 2 and 3. So 2 comes here and 3 comes there, and 3 must be positive, and then positive 3 plus 2 is 5, and 2 times 3 is 6. So these are our two factors. So now what you're going to do is, and this is why it's so easy to do these, you're going to write two parentheses, and since we don't have a coefficient on the x squared, you just write x and x. And then what kind of 2 is that? It's a positive 2. And what kind of 3 is that? It's a positive 3. And that becomes our factors of x squared plus 5x plus 6. Okay, let's look at example 2. Example 2 has a little more complicated looking thing because it has negatives in it, but you do nothing different than we did in the previous question. You see a trinomial with a 1 as a coefficient of the x squared. You instantly think, draw an x. Okay? So remember, a times c goes in the top, so that's 1 times negative 18, which is negative 18. And then the basement, which is the b, so this is our a, our b, and our c, in case you forgot. Negative 7 is our b, so our b just comes down here, and you got negative 7. Okay? So now, using these numbers, we need to figure out what will multiply to get 18 and add or subtract to get 7. And if you remember, this is negative, so that means we're going to actually use the numbers and subtract them to get a 7, and then our biggest number will be negative. So let's take negative 18, or just take 18. You don't need the negative. Okay? And we know 1 and 18 work, 2 and 9 work, 3 and 6 work. 4 doesn't go into 18, 5 doesn't go into 18, 6, here we are, so we're done getting our factors. So now we need to subtract them. Well, 18 minus 1 is 17, that's not it. 9 minus 2 equals 7, and 6 minus 3 equals 3. So it's got to be these two numbers. So you can write 9 and 2 or 2 and 9. It doesn't matter how you do it. It's written 2 and 9 here, so I'll do 2 and 9. Okay? And the bigger number is always going to be this sign. Okay? And so 9 is the bigger number, and so that gets that sign. Okay? And then negative 9 plus 2 is 18. Or 2 minus, negative 9 plus 2 is negative 7. And 2 minus 9 is also negative 7. And then 2 times negative 9 is negative 18. Okay? So, now that we have the two factors on the outside that give us 18 and they add to 7, we now write our two parentheses. And you get an x here and an x here. And then what kind of 2 is this? It's a positive 2. And what kind of 9 is that? It's a negative 9. And these become our factors of x squared minus 7x minus 18. So now we're going to move on to the next stage, which is when we don't have an a equals to 1. Okay, so now we're going to talk about factoring trinomials with a not equal to 1. So notice how we have our a, our b, and our c. Here, let me change the colors of that. Our a, our b, and our c. Okay? And our a doesn't equal 1. In this case, you want to look for a GCF because it may just turn into one that does have an a equals 1 after you take a GCF out. So what goes into 4, 18, and 36? Okay, well 4 will not go into 18, but it will go into 36, but it will not go into 18, so you can't use 4. So what's the other factor of 4? 2. So 2 goes into all three of these, so then we can pull out a 2. So I'm going to pull out a 2. Okay, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. They didn't all have an x, that's why I didn't pull out an x. We didn't pull out any x's, so the x's will all stay the same where they are. Negative 18 divided by 2 is negative 9. We didn't pull out an x, so it stays. Negative 36 divided by 2 is negative 18. Okay, and it didn't have an x, so it won't have an x here. Okay, so now this GCF, we're going to kind of forget about it until the end. I think I'm going to write my answer somewhere down in this area. So I'm going to go ahead and write, so I'll write answer down here. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and write it because I don't want to forget about it later. And I forget about them. So you might want to write it down and wherever your answer goes as well, because he's still part of this answer. Okay, so now we're going to really just focus on this red trinomial now. Anytime you see a trinomial and you've tried to take out the GCF, you need to think x or x box. Okay, so you're going to draw an x. But then, since we have a coefficient, you're going to want to draw the box. And trinomials always factor into a 2 by 2 thing. And if you remember, whenever you had a binomial times a binomial, like x plus 3 times x plus 4, whenever you multiplied them into the box, you always got 4 terms, and then it reduced the middle terms into 1 term. Okay? Or we did our like term peanut. Okay? So what we're trying to do now is we're trying to unmultiply it or factor it into these two kind of terms. Okay? So we're trying to figure out what did we multiply on the outsides here to put it in the middle. Okay? And so, just like we did before, this will be the a times the c, and this will be the b. So a times c, which would be 2 times negative 18, which is negative 36. Okay? And then our b is negative 9. Okay? So now we need to figure out what are the factors of negative 36 that will combine to give me negative 9. Now remember, this means that we're going to need to subtract whatever numbers we use, and the bigger one's going to be negative. Okay? So somewhere off to the side, I'll write 36, and then I come down with my factors. 1, 36, 2, 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, 5 won't go, and then 6 and 6. So now see how 6 and 6, it kind of like loops back around? That's where we'll stop. And then you just go through and say 36 minus 1, because we're minusing right here. Okay? Equals 35. 18 minus 2 equals 16. 12 minus 3 equals 9. Ooh, that looks like 1. Let's keep going. 9 minus 4 equals 5. And then 6 minus 6 equals 0. Okay? So, we notice that 12 and 3 are our numbers.
Miss Ramsey, if you're...
Okay? So we'll use 12 and 3, or 3 and 12. It doesn't matter. And then our bigger one is going to be the negative. Okay? So now that we have these, this is where we're going to do something a little bit different than we did when we had no coefficient. We can't just drop down and say our answer anymore because we have this 2 out in front. So what you're going to do is you're going to rewrite the very first one in the very first box. So that 2x squared goes in the first box. And you're going to rewrite your last one in this box here. Okay? And then these two terms right here will go in these two boxes because these are the two numbers that we combined in our peanut to get the negative 9x. Remember, negative 12 plus 3 equals negative 9. Okay? And it doesn't matter where you write either one, but remember, this also should go down in terms of powers of x. So it would be x squared, x, and then 1. I mean, no x, excuse me. So it would be x squared, this would have an x, and then this would have no x. So it goes 2, 1, none. Okay? And so, and remember, negative 9 has an x on it. So these got to combine to give us negative 9. So I'm just going to write negative 12 here and positive 3 here. Okay? So now you got to pay attention to what's about to happen. We're going to take GCFs out this way And so this will be the GCF going that way. And then we're going to take a GCF out this way, because remember, this is where we wrote our stuff in our box. Okay? So let's look at the purple GCF first. Is there any number that goes into both 2 and 3? Just one, so we don't have to write it. Do they both have an X? Yes. So then we have to write an X. The highest one is a 1, so the lowest one is a 1, so that's the most we can take out. It's just an X. Okay? 12 and 18 have a 6 in common. Okay? And then this is very, very important. Whatever the sign of the closer box is, that's the sign you're going to put on the 6. So this is a negative 12, so this is a negative 6. Okay? It's very important that you understand that the sign of the closer box is the sign that you take. Okay? So now we're going to go to the top. What goes into both 2 and 12? Or what number will multiply to give you a 2 and multiply to give you 12? And that's a 2. Do they both have an X? Yes, so you write it. And then 1 is the lowest exponent that they both have. Okay, so that's the one that we're going to take. What goes into 3 and 18? Well, that's 3. Or think about it like this. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 6 is negative 6 is negative 12. So 3 times x is 3x. 3 times negative 6 is negative 18. So you ask yourself, what will multiply by these things to get us this? Okay? Or 3 and 18 have a 3 in common. Either way you want to do it is fine. And then what kind of sign was this? It's positive, so that's positive. Okay? And so these are our factors that we used to make this. So we'll bring them down here. And so I'm going to write my purple one first. X minus 6. That's our first factor. And then our second factor would be the 2x and the plus 3. Feel free to re-watch this video or this section of the video again, because I know we did a lot of new stuff in this one problem. Okay? And we're going to move on to example number 2. Okay, so let's look at example 2. This one looks really difficult. Lots of big numbers. Everything has an X. Okay? Well, everything has an X should be a giveaway that there's a greatest common factor, because we haven't factored anything where the last term had an X on it. Okay? And if everything has an X, then they all have an X that you can take out. Okay? So we need to find the GCF of this. So first, we need to find the GCF. Okay? So, what goes into 45, 33, and 42? The indicator here, you want to look at 33, because that only has a couple of factors. 1 and 33, and 11 and 3. Okay? So, will 11 go into 45 or 42? Absolutely not. That's 44 is the closest number that it would go to those. Okay? So then that must mean 3 goes into it, or nothing goes into it. Okay? So, sorry for the loud announcement. Okay? So, 45 does have a 3 in it. 33 has a 3 in it. And then 42 has a 3 in it. I know this because when you add the digits, 5 plus 4 gives you 9. 9 is divisible by 3. So the number is divisible by 3. 3 plus 3 is 6. 6 is divisible by 3. 4 plus 2 is 6. 6 is divisible by 3 also. So that means each number has a 3 in it. So we'll pull out a 3. Okay? Then they all have an X. So you can pull an X out, and the smallest exponent is 1, so you can pull one of them out. Okay? So now 45 divided by 3 is 15. We have 3 x's, we took 1 out, so we have a square. Minus 33, or negative 33 divided by 3 is negative 11. We have 2 x's, we took 1 away. Negative 42 divided by 3 is negative 14. And then we have an x, and we took an x away, so we have no x's left. Okay? So now, remember, you want to write this in your answer. So I'm going to go ahead and write it down here where my answer would be, okay? And then I'm going to go and we have a trinomial now that we need to factor, okay? So we're going to draw an x. And then I'm going to go ahead and draw the t-chart right here because you kind of want it near this anyway. And then I'll draw my box. Okay? So what goes in the top of our box? Well, our attic and ceiling are in the top, are A times C. So now you have to do 15 times 14. That could take a moment, okay? But I know 15 squared is 225, and then I'm going to subtract 115 from it, so I get 210, okay? So now the basement is the negative 11, okay, or the B, okay? So now that we have our two factors, we need to figure out, well, what will give us 11? Now, I don't know all the factors of 210 off the top of my head, but I do know a couple of them. So 1 and 210, obviously. 2 and 105. 3 will go into it. 3 goes into 21 7 times, and then you have a 0. So you have 3 and 70. Okay? And then, oh, and this will be a negative 210. I'm so sorry for that. That's a positive times a negative. Okay? Which is a negative. And then we have a negative here. So remember, the numbers will subtract to give us an 11, and then the bigger number will be negative. Okay? 4, I'm not sure if it goes into it or not. Okay? 5, I know does. So 5. 5, let's see, that'd be 42. 6, it should go into it since 2 and 3 go into it. So 6 and, let's see, that'd be 3 and 5, so it'd be 35. 7 and 30. Okay, and you can start to subtract these, and you'll see how close you're getting. Okay, like 70 minus 3 is 67. So we're pretty far away from 11. 35 minus 6 equals 29. So we're getting closer. 30 minus 7 equals 23. So we're getting closer. 21 has a 10 in it. 210 has 10 in it, so let's try that. 10 and 21. Okay, so you do 21 minus 10, which equals 11. Oh, there it is right there. Okay, so 10 and 21 will be our numbers. And then 11 is negative, and so it's negative 21. Okay, so we have our two factors right here and right here. Remember that we'll write the first term, the a term, or the x squared term, in the first box. So you got 15x squared. Negative 14 will go in the last one. Okay? And then we'll take our two things here and put an x on them. It does not matter which box you use. All we have to do is flip-flop the side that the answer goes to. Okay? So now we're going to take a GCF out this way. Well, 10 and 15 have a 5 in common. They both have an x, so we'll pull an x out. 21 and 14 have a 7 in common. They don't both have an x. This is negative, so that is negative. Okay? So our first factor would be 5x minus 7. Okay? And then, let's go purple. We go this way. What do 15 and 21 have in common? Or 5 times what is 15? 3, and then just double check. 3 times 7, 21. So then you got the right one. They both have an x, and the smallest one is a 1. 10 and 14 have a 2 in common, or 5 times what is 10? And that's a 2. Okay, they don't both have an x. And then what kind of 10 is this? It's a positive, so this is a positive. Okay? And 2 times 7 is 14, or 2 times negative 7 is negative 14, however you want to look at it. So our last factor must be 3x plus 2. And that's it. That's how you factor using the Xbox method. Thank you for watching the video. Good luck in your factoring days.